Welcome to the Introduction to Windows Server 2019. I'll be your instructor, Robert McMillan, and this is going to be a great course telling all about introducing you into Windows Server and all the different capabilities that it has. So let's get started. Starting out, we've got the objectives. We're going to introduce you to Windows Server 2019, some installation requirements and deployment options. You don't have to just put the DVD in and install Windows Server. You can also do other things such as install virtual machines from ISO files. You can deploy it using Windows Deployment Services as well as Configuration Manager and many others. There's also a discussion here about deployment accelerators, licensing and activation, and new features that have come out in Windows Server 2019. Windows Server is being used by companies all over the world. If you look at the Fortune 500 companies, you can see that 95% of them are using Windows Server using Active Directory. So Active Directory is a big part of Windows Server deployments, and that's because it allows you to increase your security, increase your ability to control devices, and just a lot of other things where it stores objects like users, passwords, the computers themselves, printers, things like that. We can do a lot of things with Windows Server, such as data management. We can host virtual machines. We can host web servers. You've got email communication, such as through Microsoft Exchange Server. You can host that on your LAN if you want, or you can have it in the cloud. Then you've got application hosting as well. A big one for that would be SQL Server, where you can have a database for many different types of applications that sit on top of a database server. Server 2019 does not include Internet Explorer. So Microsoft has gotten rid of Internet Explorer on all different computers. This slide used to say it does not include Microsoft Edge, and then Microsoft flipped the script, and now they are including Edge, the Chromium version, but they are not including Internet Explorer. It does not have the Microsoft Store, so you cannot go out to the Microsoft Store to download applications, and like you can on a Windows 10 or 11 client. Then you've got Cortana, which is something that you can use again on the clients to have interactive communication, and sort of like the Echo and using Alexa, things like that. And that's not going to be included in Windows Server. And the ability to log in with a Microsoft account. So you're going to be logging in locally to the server rather than logging in with a Microsoft account like you do on the client versions. It does include features such as Active Directory, which we're going to talk about and introduce to you in this course. As a matter of fact, in the first lab, you'll be installing Active Directory on two different servers. You'll be installing Active Directory as a brand new forest and domain on one server, and then you'll be adding an additional domain controller on another server. You'll be configuring DHCP and taking a look at file and storage, print services, and management. We can deploy Windows Server 2019 using a clean install. That's just basically where you put in your DVD and run through the step-by-step installation. You could do an in-place upgrade from, say, Windows Server 2016. You can't do it from client. You can only do it from server. And you can go ahead and upgrade that and keep all your applications and other features, things like that, exactly the same. Then there's the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. That allows you to use multiple different types of customized tools for deploying Windows Server. And then you have the Assessment and Planning Toolkit called MAP as well. So to do a clean install, this is the basic installation where you boot your machine from Windows Server 2019 DVD, for instance, or if you're in a virtual machine, you would do it from an ISO file that you would download from Microsoft. You choose the installation, the time, format, keyboard, things like that. Choose either the standard or the data center architecture. Now, that is a big option to choose when you're licensing it. So standard is going to be much less expensive. Data center is going to cost a lot more. And the big difference is going to be with virtual machines. There's some other differences as well, but mostly a data center comes with an unlimited amount of licenses for virtual machines, as many as you want to put on the server. The standard version will give you 2 free licenses of Windows Server Virtual that you can put on top of your paid physical license. And then you can pay additional licenses for any other virtual machines you want to put on. So you can put more than 2 on a standard version. It's just that you'd have to pay for those separately. And then with or without the desktop experience. The desktop experience is what we're all used to. It's with the start menu and all the different applications. Without desktop experience, you'd basically have this core version that just gives you a command prompt with PowerShell, and it uses a lot less resources. So it's more secure, uses less resources. So in some cases, it may be the better way to go. But in other cases, people just want to be able to have that start menu and that familiar graphical user interface, or GUI as we call it. And so they'll go with the desktop experience. There's no difference in price with or without the desktop experience, but you do get to save those additional resources and increase security if you don't use it. Then you need to accept the license. If you don't accept the license, you cannot install it. Then you choose the custom installation. So if you're doing an upgrade, you'll be given an option to do the upgrade at that point. But if you're doing a brand new installation, you'll choose custom. And then you'll choose the volume that's going to host the installation. So if you have multiple hard disks or volumes on your computer, then you'll be given the choice as to which one you want to install it on. Of course, if you just have one, then you'll just choose that. So the in-place upgrade, as I mentioned earlier, that's, say, if you had Windows Server 2016 before that, and you'd like to upgrade to a newer version. Now, if you've purchased the proper licensing, you can also upgrade from standard to data center. Once again, big expense difference between standard and data center. I remember having a client one time who was looking at the difference between the two. They had a whole bunch of paid versions of Windows Server, and they wanted to install new Windows Server 2019. And unfortunately, they looked at the price of what data center would have cost them for all those virtual machines, and it was going to go from $800 for the standard version to around $100,000 for the data center version, because they wanted to put on so many virtual machines. But I said, hey, you don't have to pay for data center because you've already paid for the licenses of all those virtual machines. So you can just virtualize them and move them right over into the Windows Server and just buy the standard edition. So they were pretty happy about that. So if you've already purchased all those licenses before, there's no reason to pay for the data center version. Now, there are some other, like I said, options that are in data center besides just the virtual machines that make the difference between the two. And we're going to talk about some of those in upcoming modules in this course. So you can upgrade your operating system from Windows Server 2012 R2 or newer to 2019 directly. So if you have R1, for instance, or the first release, they didn't really call it R1, it was just the first release, you could upgrade 2012 R1 to R2 and then go to 2019 if you'd like. So you put that DVD in, you run setup, which automatically boots from the DVD if you're running a brand new clean install, and then you'll respond to the prompt for all these different things, such as downloading updates, which of course is a great idea, drivers, and optional features. Now, the drivers portion, you could also use third-party drivers if you'd like at that point, or you could wait until Windows is booted up and then install the drivers then as well. You'll choose which version of Windows Server you'd like to put in, and then you'll keep on going. Now, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, that is another option. So that is for the creation and deployment, as you see here, of Windows operating system images. So you can create customized images, and you can do this for Windows 10 and 11 as well. It's not just for server. And you can create these images, and then you can boot up. When you boot up your computer, you've probably seen this Pixie boot, we call it, pre-execution environment option. And what you do is you can press a button to automatically receive an IP address from your Microsoft Deployment Services or Windows Deployment Services, and then you boot up into the WDS server and then pick that custom image that you created using the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and then you can install it. So the nice thing about that is if you have to deploy a lot of servers, and again, works with workstations as well, then you can choose to create this customized image to save you a lot of time. Let's take a look at some of the new features in Windows Server 2019. We've got the REFS volume deduplication. So what that does is it allows us to take any duplicate files and it erases them and just keeps one copy of them to save storage. You've got storage class memory support. Some of these things are in the background that you don't really see. Cluster sets, storage migration, system insights. Lots of different things here. You've shielded virtual machines for Linux, hyper-converged infrastructure. So all these things we're going to be covering in our book as well as in our course. We'll start with deduplication. REFS is the newer volume type of format that we can add into Windows Server. So it supports the ability to use deduplication with that. We're only supported that in TFS in other versions. And that can save you a lot of storage space on your server if you have a lot of duplicate files. Then you've got storage class memory support. So storage created from flash-based non-volatile media. So basically what that means is SSD drives, solid-state drives, those kinds of things. NVMe, the newer version of a solid-state drive. This is going to be much faster access to your CPU than using traditional types of hard drives. Cluster sets. This is a loosely coupled federated grouping of multiple failover clusters. All right, so what that basically means is a cluster allows you to use shared storage, and a cluster set allows you to create multiple of these shared storage. So if any one server went down, then it would allow the other servers to be able to continue running in this cluster set. So this really allows for high availability. And if you have any kind of machine problem, it can fail over to one of the other servers or just keep things running by being highly available. Now, we've had this with storage for many years, but now you can do this with multiple servers. Instead of just using storage where one server connects to it, and then if that server fails, the other server picks up the slack. What happens is you've got all these servers sharing all of their storage, all their CPU, all their RAM, and then if any of them have a problem, things continue to run sort of like RAID it does, with a redundant array of inexpensive disks, which we've been using for decades. So here we have storage migration. This makes it easier to migrate storage to Windows Server or to Azure. So if you've got a physical server, you can migrate that to a virtual machine. And if you've got a virtual machine, you can move that between various different servers, as well as you can migrate it to Azure. So you can use that for both Windows and Linux servers, and you can transfer to newer servers or to Azure virtual machines. Windows comes with some artificial intelligence. It can predict analytics capabilities native to Windows Server. So it can forecast what's going to happen for your future usage. So that way it can warn you ahead of time to say, hey, you're going to need more storage, or maybe you need more RAM, or whatever it is. So you can proactively manage that in case that happens. And that's through System Insights. Storage Replica is now available for Standard Edition. So previously, this was only available for Data Center. So what this does is, let's say you have a SAN, which is a storage area network connected usually through iSCSI. It's just a big box of hard drives. And you want to make a copy of this, so you always have a copy, whether it's on site or maybe in a data center someplace else or a different office or maybe even in Azure. And so what this does is it allows you to save data to the one storage device, the SAN device, and it will automatically replicate that to another SAN device. Now, on the Standard Edition, it will only do it up to 2 terabytes for a single volume. So you can create multiple volumes of 2 terabytes if you'd like, but no more than 2 terabytes in a single volume, which is usually fine for smaller businesses. Now, for larger companies, when you have data center, this is one of those other advantages of data center that I was mentioning before. So it allows you to do much higher, I would say at this point, an unlimited amount, just because I don't know what the actual capacity is, but a much larger amount using data center that can be replicated from one storage SAN device to another. Shielded virtual machines is another new feature. It's a feature that can protect Hyper-V Generation 2 virtual machines. Well, all virtual machines nowadays are going to be Generation 2 ever since 2008. 2008 was the last generation of Gen 1s. Then starting with 2012, everything by default is going to be Gen 2. Doesn't mean that you can't create a Gen 1 virtual machine. It just means that the default is going to be Gen 2. And so it helps protect those virtual machines from unauthorized access. And it's going to use things like Secure Boot, BitLocker, which is your encryption program, and the Virtual Trusted Platform module, which is going to be a way of protecting your virtual machine. So if it ever gets separated from your host, then it becomes unusable. HCI, Hyperconverged Infrastructure. So that's the Azure Stack HCI version. It's a special version of Windows Server. And even though it says Azure here, it's something that can be installed locally in your physical LAN, if you'd like. So administrators can dynamically add or remove host servers from the Windows 2019 cluster. So if you have multiple host servers that are hosting virtual machines and you create an HCI cluster, then what you can do is you can not only move the virtual machines around, but you can also remove some of the physical machines so you can replace them with newer physical machines when needed. Now let's talk about Windows Server Core. Windows Server Core, you need to choose between installing the server with or without the desktop experience. So if you choose the Server Core, you're just going to get a command prompt. That's it. Well, it's also a PowerShell box as well. So if you decide you want to do a core version, that's because you want to use less resources and increase your security. And you can see here at the bottom that it's not going to be available for the Windows Server 2019 Essentials or the free version of Hyper-V. Core was released as this minimal installation. It's not as minimal as the Nano version, but it is definitely a lot less of an installation than the GUI version, where you have all this overhead for the graphical user interface. It does not have as many server roles installed by default, so it has a smaller footprint, which increases the security. And there's two ways that you can install it, either entirely as a shell or Windows Server 2019 with desktop experience installed. So Server Core is always there. It's just either with or without the desktop experience. And you can manage either of these using multiple different things. You've got the Windows Admin Center, which is a web-based version to manage your servers. You can also manage clients as well. Feature on-demand app compatibility, sconfig on a local device. That's just a command prompt that you can use to configure your server. And then PowerShell via remote connection. So once you've installed your core version, you can remote into it and control it that way. Administrators will use Core, who use Core, we're going to see added flexibility based on what it is that they're doing. Since you cannot use the graphical user interfaces so much locally on the computer, you can use GUI tools remotely if you'd like. But in this case, you're also going to be able to see some management tools, such as Resource Monitor and MMC for Microsoft Management Console. Microsoft is saying that Server Core is the recommended installation in most cases because you just don't necessarily want to have that lowered security and the higher overhead that the GUI version has. However, I find that's just not practical. Most sysadmins are going to have more than enough processing power and the ability to uninstall any unneeded services, but they're going to want to have that GUI, that graphical user interface. So practically, you're going to see people use the full desktop experience. But what Microsoft suggests and what people use are not always the same things. So certain applications are unavailable in Core, such as the VM Manager, System Center Data Protection Manager, SharePoint, Project Server, and Exchange. You also have some roles and services that you just flat out can't use, such as remote desktop services, web access, and these other services that you see here. Windows Admin Center. Windows Admin Center is a great free management tool from Microsoft. You can download it for not just the server, but you can install it on your Windows 10 or 11 desktop. So you can install it there, and then you can start managing every different type of Windows device inside your network. And yeah, you basically install it as a web interface, and then you go ahead and add all the different servers that you'd like to add. Now, if you're already running Internet Information Services on your computer, then it can use a different port to manage Windows Admin Center. So instead of using 443, which is the default in most cases, it would end up using a different one like 444 or something like that. With Windows Admin Center, you can manage servers using what's called Remote PowerShell. Remote PowerShell just basically opens up PowerShell and remotes into the other server, and it uses WMI, which is a technology that's used to manage other servers, and it's on by default, and Windows Remote Management. Those two combined types of services need to be turned on in order to remote into it using PowerShell, as well as connecting to it using the web server. And you see it's going to add in this web server. It's not a full version of the Internet Information Services, but it's going to be a mini web server that runs on different ports other than what IIS uses. So installing Windows Admin Center is really easy. You just download the installation and you run through the wizard until it's completely installed, and then you open it up and start adding your servers. And we'll be doing that in this course. Server Manager has been used in Windows Server for many different versions for many years, decades actually. And Windows Server is a great launching point to open up many different management tools. So there's a tools menu inside Windows Server Manager, and Server Manager will go ahead and load at startup by default. You can turn that off if you'd like, but it goes ahead and starts up. And then you can click on Tools to access anything that's been installed, and you can go to Add Roles and Features to add additional roles and features that may not have been installed by default. It also allows you to add in other servers, so you can add in those servers to manage from a single Windows Server Manager. Similar to Windows Admin Center, you can just go in and create a server group, add in the servers you'd like, and start managing them. Now you can add roles and features right inside Server Manager, not just for the local server, but all the other servers as well. And with Windows Server 2019, it's also added into cloud services, so you can connect into Azure to manage some of your cloud services like storage and virtual machines. The dashboard has links to these web-based articles for new features and links to learn about software solutions. So all different things that can be helpful in case you get stuck on a specific problem. Here are some of the features and components that you'll see inside Server Manager. You've got the computer name and domain membership, firewall, desktop, and all the different things that you see here. And it does more than that as well. Server Manager, the dashboard came out in 2012. Now in 2008, there was a version of the dashboard, but it was two different things. One was for roles, one was for features, and then they combined them into one central dashboard for installing both. The remote server administration tools allows us to manage a lot of different things, such as we call these RSATs. So you can install these onto clients. So if you don't want to put in Windows Admin Center, you can do this instead, but it does kind of the same thing. So you can install Server Manager right onto Windows 11, for instance. So it looks like the same thing as the server. And from there, you can open up the same tools that you could from Server Manager right inside the server itself. So you have your choice. You can use the Windows Admin Center, or you can use Server Manager right on your Windows client to manage your Windows servers. There are some access control features that can be used to create a security profile, such as least privilege access right. This is something that's really being emphasized in Windows security and all security in general, is not giving too many rights to too many people. So we call that least privilege. And you have role-based access control. This is giving users basically rights to what role they have in the company, rather than just giving them individual rights, which can be very difficult, and you could end up giving out too many roles. And we have rule-based access control, delegated privileged accounts, and attribute-based access control. Of all of these, I would say least privilege and role-based are the two most important that you're going to be hearing about in this course. So we talked a lot about Windows Server additions, deployment options, features, Admin Center, and more. When you go to take your quiz, I recommend that you also have your slides up as well, because you might see a lot of answers to quiz questions in here. Your quizzes are going to be open book, open internet, whatever it is that you want to use to get your answers. However, the book and the slides are going to contain all of the answers. Whether or not you find them quickly is going to be how well you remembered as you went through the reading. And that concludes our first module. I look forward to our course together this term, where we learn all about Windows Server 2019 and its features.